In the previous video, I covered the basics of how paperclip trick works. The link will be in the description and in the top right corner. In this video, I'm going to use this trick on 2 different cars to make sure you know the safe way of doing it. But before we jump to that, I want to mention, if the malfunctioning window is in one of your passenger doors, try to operate it from the switch in that door and from the master switch. One of the two might work. But if it doesn't help, or it's the driver door window giving you trouble, gain access to the back of the switch and unplug the connector going to the malfunctioning part of it. Some switches are as simple as pop them out of the door panel with a screwdriver or a key. Others have to be accessed by removing the whole door panel. It's more work up front, but it has its perks in the end. I'll talk more on that later. Next, draw a map of pins if you don't have a wiring diagram. With the help of a test light or a multimeter or a power probe, it'll be very easy to do. First, I'll start with the cheapest and simplest tool, the test light, so that you understand the concept. Connect one side of the test light to the negative terminal of the battery and touch the other side to the positive to confirm the test light works and we have good battery voltage. Then, if my test light wire is not long enough, I would find a good source of ground near the window switch connector. This should work. In case you didn't know, negative side of the battery is connected to the body of the car, so practically any bare metal on a car is the negative side of the battery, more commonly known as ground. Turn the key on to power up the connector. As you all know, windows don't work with the key off. And start poking the connector pins with the test light. The very first pin lights up the test light, which tells me it is power, or positive side of the battery. The rest of the pins show nothing, except for the last one. But the light is dim, so it must have lower voltage. Therefore, I'll just leave it alone and stay away from it. It really doesn't matter to me what purpose it serves in a car, because I want full battery power to operate my windows. Now I'm going to connect my test light to the newly found power and run the other side of the test light across the remaining pins. The second pin from the left lights up the test light, which tells me this is my ground. Now I'll cut out a couple of wires. If I didn't have any wires and I had to use paper clips, I would at least wrap them in some electrical tape to prevent them from touching each other and from burning my fingers when I operate the window. But wires are definitely a better option. Just cut off an appropriate size, squeeze the wire just enough to cut through the insulation and twist it until you can remove the tip of the insulation and expose the metal part. If you have a wire stripping tool like this one, you can just pick the right wire size, squeeze and pull. For illustration purposes, I'm going to feed the red wire to the pin that has power and green wire to the pin that has ground. Now run the power wire to the closest neutral pin and run the ground wire across the rest of them until I get a response from one of the windows. Passenger side window moved. Now I know these 2 pins are connected to the passenger window motor. Move my power wire 1 pin down and connect the ground to the remaining neutral pin. And bingo! These 2 pins are connected to the driver's side window motor. Now, if I feed power and ground to the opposite sides of this motor, it'll move the window in the opposite direction. As you can see, the basic strategy here is find power and ground, identify neutral pins that show nothing, and avoid mystery pins, which is everything else. Next tool is probably the most common on the list, a multimeter. Very useful and can be used in many different applications, at home and on your car. This is the cheapest model one can find for $5 to $10 at Harbor Freight or free with a coupon, and it will work for this job just fine. Basic setup: plug your black wire to COM, which stands for Common Ground Terminal, and red wire to Multi-Purpose Terminal, responsible for measuring voltage, resistance, and small currents. Turn the multimeter on and set it to DC voltage. Find the closest number above 12 volts, which is 20 on this multimeter. Connect your black lead to ground. Now, if you couldn't find any good ground around the switch, you could use some long wires like this to run the ground directly from the battery. And use the red lead to look for power at the connector. But let's take it up a notch and use a different car for this example. Don't forget to turn the key on, connect black lead to ground, and start looking for power with your red lead. So in this connector, there are 2 pins that provide power to the switch. And then there is a pin with 2 volts, which we're going to leave alone. Now I'm going to turn the key off and check the 2 powers again. The first power pin still has voltage, the second one does not, so that's the one I'm going to use. As we all know, Windows don't work with the key off, so this other power is probably used to power up something else, like electric locks. Regardless of what it powers, it may have a fuse of a lower rating, I'm just going to say 1 amp. When the power assigned for the window motors has a fuse of a higher rating, like 30 amps, because window motors draw quite a bit of current. So if you try to power up your window motor with a power fused at 1 amp, you can blow that fuse. So to be safe, I'll go with this one. Now I'm going to use this pin as my source of power and start looking for ground. And the very next pin shows we have voltage, which means it is ground. And it is no surprise because the wire is black. If you didn't know, 9 times out of 10, solid black wire in a car is ground. Next, I'm going to check the rest of the pins to make sure we don't have any more grounds. And we don't. Now I'm going to take my red and green wires, plug my green wire to ground on one side and connect the other side to this blue wire. If you're wondering why, as I mentioned earlier, removing the panel to gain access to the switch connector has its perks. Not only do you have to remove the panel anyway to do any repairs on your malfunctioning window in the near future, you also get closer to the window motor, so you can see wire colors, or you can even shoot power and ground directly to the motor, if you have wires long enough to run them straight from the battery. Window motors are usually held by 3 bolts or nuts. And there is the white and the blue wire we need. So now I'm going to connect my power to the white wire and bingo. If I send my ground to the white wire and send my power to the blue wire, the window will move in reverse. Before I share a few final safety tips, let's quickly go over the power probe since I mentioned it. It hooks up to both sides of the battery so you can shoot power or ground at the tip and see how many volts your battery has. You also have a spare ground wire, and if you touch any source of power or ground with the tip, it will tell you what you're touching. The wire is about 20 feet long, enough to work with your taillights or even run trailer wiring. So here everything is very simple. With the key on, find all the neutral pins that show nothing. Connect the spare ground to one of the neutral pins and see on which of the remaining neutral pins it shows up. Send power to that pin to get the window working. Flip power and ground to operate the window in reverse. Another thing I want to mention, don't try to back probe the connector while it is still plugged into the switch. You're not going to get anywhere with that. Here is a simplified version of a real switch. When we pull up on it to make the window go up, it closes this part of the circuit, so our current will flow this way and to the left across the motor. When we push down on the switch, it closes this part of the circuit, so the current will flow this way and to the right across the motor. Therefore, when the connector is unplugged from the switch, we see power, nothing, nothing, ground. If we plug the connector into the switch, this ground will immediately be on both sides of the motor. And now, if we try to back probe our connector, we will see power, ground, ground, ground. So remember to always unplug your connector before trying to use this trick. Also, if for some reason you can't find power or ground at your connector, you may have a broken wire. Check the wires inside this boot. It may be the reason your window is not working in the first place. You can pull it back to expose the wires or carefully cut it open. Just use some small zip ties to close it back up when you're done. One last thing I want to mention, not all switches operate this way, where the high current required to power up window motors flows directly through the switch. More and more car manufacturers use a different way to control power windows, where the current flows through a relay controlled by a switch or by a control module when it gets a signal from the switch. The biggest giveaways of such systems are small connectors, tiny pins, thin wires, not designed to handle any significant amount of current. And if you try to measure voltage at any pins, you will get a number of random readings like 2, 5, 7 volts, or some readings will just fluctuate. If you have this kind of switch, this trick will not work, and you can do more harm than good by trying to use it. So now you know what to do and what not to do, what tools to have, and how to use them in order to perform this trick safely. I hope this video was helpful. Please give it a thumbs up if it made sense. Share your feedback and experience in the comments below. Good luck and take care.